What's up, rockers?
Hey, I'm Kaz.
And I'm Shane. Welcome to another episode of For the Record with Kaz and Shay. Kaz, who's this beautiful gentleman sitting in between us?
In between us is the meat of the bread. It is Sean Campbell, a good friend of ours. And this episode is going to, I don't know, it's going to be highly intelligent.
Are we calling this one The Science of Sound? We were
The
both
science
thinking
of
of it.
sound is what it is.
That's how you know that Kaz and I are soulmates, because the entire time we were thinking about this episode, I'm like, let's call it The Science of Sound. And then Kaz just said that like 2 minutes ago. We are truly soulmates. But Sean, it's great to have you here. We came over to your house, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and Kaz is like, you got to check out this sound system. And it blew me away. I know Kaz was already blown away, but this is unlike anything I've ever seen. We both listen to a lot of music, but, you know, I have like just a basic record player and bookshelf speakers. It's not even that
High quality.
Yeah, it just, but this system is just so great.
I was, when I first met Sean, we were talking music and stuff, and he's like, you got to come hear my setup. And I just actually wanted to just box all my existing stuff and put it away and just hang out here all the time.
Yeah.
From this camera angle, you guys can't see, but we're going to tour you through the whole setup that Sean has here, and he's going to talk about everything. We're going to start the whole process of listening to a record from stage one of the cleaning process all the way to putting it on the turntable. And Sean is going to really go into detail about it. He's going to answer the questions. Can you get good sound from a CD as you can with an album? Are vinyl the best sounding things? All those.
What about those limited edition colored vinyls? Should you buy those?
Should you buy a colored vinyl? Sean's going to tell you whether you should or not. It's all really fun because we went up record shopping at High Voltage a couple weeks ago. And just listening to you talking away, I was just like, it made me feel smart.
Yeah, and then it made me feel like I need to throw all my stereo equipment away because it's not this. This is amazing. So how did you get into all of this, Sean?
Well, it's a good question. I think, I grew up, way back, I think started really getting into music with my brothers, older brothers, and back in the 70s. And they had, the classic vintage Yamaha gear. And, we didn't have hardly any money, but my brother saved up, worked hard, and bought this beautiful Yamaha system. And I remember just as a kid, I was so mesmerized by it. And, he'd throw on a tape or he'd throw on a vinyl, and I was lost. And I knew from then I was just hooked. Flash forward years later, got super into car audio. But, with the environment in the car, there's so many challenges. You never get that true two-channel sound that you'll experience here. And so, again, you flash forward, and everything converted over into like home theater was like the thing, and so everyone really moved away from the simple two-channel system and went into home theater. I did the same thing, and never looked back. Well, it wasn't until about 6-7 years ago when we purchased the home that we're sitting in now, where I walked in, my wife and I were looking at the home, and I look in the closet here, which looked a little bit different than it does now, and I look in there, and sure as hell enough, I see the same vintage Yamaha components that I remember as a kid, and there was something about it where it brought me back to a time, and it just gave me this feeling. And so much so that, later that night we're, at our other home thinking about this house, and, I asked my wife, I said, would it be weird if I can't stop thinking about this stereo she had. And I go, would it be weird if I called the owner and asked if we paid extra, she'd include it in the home? And she goes, nah, what do you have to lose? So I called the owner and I said, hey, really love the house. I actually love the audio equipment that you have, that vintage Yamaha gear, and we'd be able to add more into the sell of the house if you're interested in parting with it. And she said, I can tell that you would really appreciate it of anyone. She goes, I'm just going to leave it here for you. And so that's when it started. And so from there, I actually was using this old vintage gear. Got some basic speakers, and vinyl was just starting to kind of have this resurgence. Picked up a basic turntable, and then I got hooked again, and then it just became what you'll see here today. So
it's kind of like how I did with the camera. I kind of started with a basic camera, and it has worked up, and you start building on things.
Sure.
And we're going to see your whole build from that Yamaha setup that was left here to where we are now. We're going to give you a full tour, and you're going to just kind of give people a different perspective on how cool it is to listen to vinyl, especially if they're sitting here. And obviously the seat that we gave you here, we call it the sweet spot. It's like a baseball bat. You had all the speakers and sound laser pointed to this exact spot for the perfect sound. How did you get into all of so to say, the science of all the sound traveling, the sound insulators, what you play?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I get that a lot, and people wonder what all this is. And, it was just, as I'm kind of learning more about sound, I found myself just fascinated with sound, right? You can't see it, but you can hear it. And for me, it was so fascinating to see just subtle changes of where I'd position speakers, the difference it would make. And so then, beauty of the internet, just research, and really diving into a lot of different articles around sound engineering and how sound reacts to boundaries, how it builds energies in certain areas of a room. And I remember that in car radio. You hear those typical cars where they're going down the street and you hear that boom, boom. Well, it's not what the artist intended you to hear. That's not what the bass is. What it's doing is it's building energy in that environment, and it's portraying that out. And so same thing in a room. You can build energies in different parts of the room, and you have to control it. And so this room is not about soundproofing, it's about sound control. And there's a big difference between the two. And so with me, just understanding, and every room is different, all the physics are different, and you have challenges with open areas and lower ceilings, things that aren't perpendicular. And so you have to control the sound and really kind of create, your kind of vortex within this room. And like I said, every room is unique. And so, as I learned more, to me, then it's not so much of as much of a science as it is an art. And it's really a mix of the two, because you really have to get to know your room and know how sound reacts to it, and then be able to, play with different materials and sound control and speaker position to be able to control it and get that ultimate kind of euphoric feel when you hear music playing. And it's like this energy. And once it kind of almost like, I don't want to say tickle or affect your eardrums, you know it. It's like this sensation you get. And once you nail it, it's just like, it's it. And that's what's just so cool, because you can't see it, but you know it by feeling and hearing it, and then just the emotions you feel when you hear the music.
Well, once again, my mind is already blown. You think about music so differently than I do, and Kaz, and probably everyone out there, and it's just so cool. You ready to take a tour of this place, Kaz?
Yeah, let's start off at the very beginning on when you acquire a record, and then we're going to end it up to when you put it on. So we're going to take you a little tour here, and Sean's going to kind of show you the whole setup. We're going to talk about why he picks what he picks, and this is going to be fun.
Awesome. So this is your record cleaner. It does not look like what I use to clean my record, my little basic $10 brush that I sometimes, not every single time, put over my record. I should at least clean it every time with my brush. But what is this? Tell us more about this.
Yeah, so when we talk about kind of the first step with myself and vinyl, when I procure a vinyl, when you think about it, playing a record, it's totally a mechanical thing, right? It's not digital, it's not automatic, it's so mechanical, the whole process. And so when you buy like used albums, when you walk into a vinyl store, it has a certain smell to it that people love. They're familiar with that nostalgic smell. Well, that smell is typically a combination of mold. It's the paper decay, because the paper sleeves that come in a lot of those old original recordings, it starts to decay, right? And then that is a lot of what you're smelling. You're smelling maybe some of the folks had, these records were in someone's attic, cigarette smoke, you name it. And so you think about that, and some of these albums, when you look at some of the classic rock, I mean, they're approaching 40, 50, 60 years old, right? Well, think of all of that decay getting into the grooves of those albums, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that some people think, well, the cracks and the pops and the, kind of nostalgic, but really it's flawed, right? You're listening to something that wasn't what the recording artist wanted you to hear.
Right.
So to get rid of that, all that stuff, this is a cleaning machine, and it's really kind of like a modified vacuum machine. And so essentially when I get an album, I'll turn it on, and you throw on a record just like you would on a turntable, and there's a solution that is used, and what I prefer, it's made by Mobile Fidelity, Moofy, is the enzyme cleaner. And the enzyme is what will dig deep into the grooves and kill anything that's in there. It'll really dig deep and get anything that's been settling in there. And so I'll just put just kind of a nice little swirl around the vinyl. And then I'll take this brush, which you'd be amazed that it feels somewhat bristly, but not enough bristly to obviously scratch the record. And then I'll go around and make sure there's a nice even coverage all the way around. Careful not to get the label wet. You never want the labels to get wet, and that's why this is just designed to just reach into the dead wax before the label. And then I would let that sit typically for about 3 to 5 minutes and let this enzyme really soak in and just start getting that gunk loosened up. And then once that happens, I come back, hit it a few more times with the brush, and then I'll set this down, which has a nice, almost like a velvety finish to it, so it doesn't, obviously scratch or harm the record. And then there's basically a cavity in here to air to come through. So when I turn on the vacuum part of it, this thing will suck the hell out of all of that stuff, right? And as you can hear, it's just like a vacuum, right? And so that'll suck all that stuff out, and it collects it in the cavity in here, and then you empty it out. I have like this mason jar that's clear, and then if you hold that up to a light, you'll see all the crap that most people are just running through their table, and the needle's just hitting that shit and wearing out their needle, all sorts of stuff, and then you're hearing a lot of stuff. So as long as a vinyl record doesn't have any scratches in it, if you clean it through this system, it's going to sound really, really good. It'll be night and day. So nothing touches my table without it being clean first.
And that even goes saying, like, when you buy a brand new album, you're still going to run yours through here.
Yep, that's a great point, Brian, because when you think about the pressing process, they're, especially nowadays when they're doing it so quickly, there's not a lot of QA that's going on. Some very few record pressing plants do, but so typically when these are going through multiple stamps, there could be chemicals that they're using, like a releasing agent, like a silicone, perhaps, and so you want to get that off. Obviously, so that's kind of the first thing. Another thing is when they're cutting these and they're pressing them. There could be just little bits of pieces of vinyl that are in the grooves that have been settled in there. A lot of times, too, in the record plants, they're handling the vinyls and they're getting them from one place to another or QA checking some. And so there's going to be oily fingerprints, perhaps. It's what I've seen when I visited a plant one time. And so to me, it was just more reassurance that even on new vinyl, you definitely want to clean them.
So you mentioned that every record that you buy goes through this.
Yep.
And then, so if it sits in your house for a few months, are you?
Nope.
Is it just a one-time
It's
deal?
it's one and done, because as long as you're transferring it, once you go through the cleaning and you put it in a non-paper sleeve, and there's really no reason that this would ever get gunked up again, because the way these are stored is then I put it inside the sleeve sideways, so then no dust gets in there. The paper's not decaying inside the vinyl, and so you're good. And I record everything, when it was cleaned, the condition, I rate the records, and so I keep a log in an Excel file of all the albums I have and when they were cleaned. And I very rarely have had to go back and clean again.
We need to step up our game, Kaz.
It's just kind of like I was going to say. It's we get excited. Whew, we got a new album. We want to go home and put it straight on. Mm-hmm. Well, I can only imagine you, because the albums that you buy, again, are kind of not like what we buy. Should we talk about maybe your Zeppelin album?
Sure, yeah. So there's, what's really fun about vinyl, too, for folks that are really into it, and a lot of folks know this that are like collectors, is there's so many different pressings for just a title, just an album. And that's where the fun really comes in. And for myself, since, I'm what would be considered an audiophile, the curse of having a system like this is it's very revealing. And so you hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so that's where really coming into the source, the actual recording and the pressing, all of that makes a huge difference. And so if you can find, albums that are, maybe they were an original pressing by a specific mastering engineer that was very sought after, who was really good at their craft, those are very sought after. And then the others, you'll see, you've got, the original master recordings that were, the Japanese pressing, where they're actually having the mastering from the analog tapes onto the vinyl. Those are really key, but they're very expensive. And to find some of those that are years old in good shape is also another challenge. But they're out there, and you can find those. Now, the one I'm holding in my hand right now is Led Zeppelin. And so if you look, here's one of the original pressings of Led Zeppelin, and here's another one. And so look very similar, but very different. And the difference is this one here is a very rare pressing of Led Zeppelin. And this was, so the story goes, and there's really, this is more of a story that I've learned through some others that are closer to it than I am. But apparently, back in the day, for whatever reason, Jimmy Page lost the rights to the analog tapes. Don't know the story, don't know exactly what happened, but lost the rights to the original analog tapes. Well, later, back in 2003, 2001, Classic Records was able to get the analog tapes for a limited time, and so they pressed these or mastered these records on typically 180 gram weight or 200 gram weight of vinyl, which is a thicker, heavier vinyl, which has deeper grooves to cut in to get more of the signal out. And so these were a very limited run with those analog tapes, which are next to impossible to ever get. And so they pressed these on the thicker vinyl, limited run, and they are absolutely stunning. If you were to listen to the difference between this and one of the issues back in like the 70s, it's truly night and day. The dynamics are there. Back then, the mastering engineers had to do a lot of filtering because turntables couldn't handle the dynamics back then or the speakers. And so, flash forward, and then you got systems now that can handle that. Well, when this is done, there's not as much filterization going on in the mastering because now the systems can handle that dynamic range. And so when you hear some of the older stuff and it sounds like there's it's a little bit like compressed or like a blanket that's been put over your speakers, that's a lot of the reason why. It's only as good as the entire process. And these, when they were done with classic records, it was everything from the analog tapes, the mastering engineer, the plating, the cutting of the master, and the pressing plant, and the quality of that, and the packaging, everything was just, it was just unbelievable. And so these are very, very sought after, super expensive. I had the opportunity of having numerous sealed versions of the different pressings, and to help pay for some of my system, I actually traded those in return for being able to buy some of the gear that I have.
So how would one know, actually, just by looking at it, just by reading? Usually it'll say on the back somewhere. Huh?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot to the coding that's within a record, and so every record is coded with like for this one example is SD7208.
Okay.
And so there's sites out there that you can go and look that up, but even if you look that up, there's also different variations of it. And so that's when you have to start looking into the coding and the dead wax. And so in the dead wax, typically the mastering engineers will engrave and sometimes engrave, and there'll be stamped information on the dead wax. And all of that will be indicative of what you really have. But you really have to know what to look for. So
yeah, I mean, we both store our collection on Discogs, and we put in the numbers to add records to our collection, and that number might show 25 different versions.
Totally. Yep.
And I had a NoFX record, just a basic record, and the way I entered it in looked like it was extremely rare. And I don't even know my collection was public, so somebody offered me like $600 for a record that I bought for 20. I'm like, I don't think it's that version. Let's.
How many of our friends are going to be looking through their Led Zeppelin album now? Like, is this the one?
Right. Yeah. And folks that have this usually know. I mean, it's like I said, it was very limited, very sought after, very specific, and very hard to find. I mean, you right now, if you went to search on some of these, you probably couldn't even find them anywhere.
No. Yeah. What would something like that go? If you could find one, what are people going to sell that for?
I mean, it depends. Like, something like this where it's basically, I mean, this was essentially sealed like not long ago. And I opened it so that, because I like to listen. I'm not a total collector. I want to be able to hear it. And so I've opened it, and so it's an open, like, new record, right? And obviously I take care of my stuff. So something like this, I mean, if you saw it on there, you could see people that'll have it for $2,000, $3,000, and they're usually from another country, and so so it's hard to say because it's just depending on the market and what's available at the time. But these are very, very hot pressings. Here, I'll show you. Supertramp is another great example of 3 different pressings that are considered like audiophile pressings. And so you have everything from this pressing of Supertramp, which is based out of Canada, and very different label than what a lot of people have ever seen. You'd be pretty hard pressed to ever see anything like this at like a high voltage. But this is an audiophile series. And again, this is produced and manufactured in Canada, and it has a different sound than like this one that most people see as a high audiophile pressing. Original master recording, that's from the original analog tapes as well. But this is a different process, different company. This is made in Japan. And this is probably considered a little bit hotter of a pressing, so you're going to have a little bit more of the high end, where this one's a little bit tamer there, but incredible mid-range and mid-bass. And then this one takes it to a completely different level, which is the ultra high quality record pressing. And this is a mobile fidelity as well, but very different than this. So it's almost like you're taking what was like an original issue of Supertramp, putting it on steroids with this, and then you add this, it's like on steroids again. And so this one was very, very limited, and these are going to be in the $1,000 range as well. And these you'd be ever pressed. I mean, people don't even know that these exist. again, just very, very different pressings and different sound qualities from each. And again, some of that's personal taste, but this one is like the holy grail.
So if you guys still think you want to do a record listening collection after that whole process, wait till you see what we got in store next for you here. So Sean's going to explain now the setup, and we're going to start how all of it starts is with basic plugging it in and with the power here. And you just don't have a regular plug it into your wall. You did something different here.
I did, yeah. So it's a great observation. So, and I did this for a couple of reasons. So what I did is I've ran dedicated circuits for my audio system. And so that completely separates it out from the rest of the appliances and electricity in the home. And a couple of reasons to do that. One is you have, say you've got on your one circuit, well, you've got all your lights connected to it. Maybe you've got an appliance connected to it. Well, all those things are going to draw voltages at different times. And so now your audio equipment is going to be competing with that. And so, turn on a vacuum, it's going to start coming through as a buzz, appliance comes on. And so it's all about lowering what's called the noise floor. You want it as silent as possible. And so when you're playing music and you have those silent passages within a song, having that true, that noiseless silent passage becomes really critical. And so running these dedicated circuits, that's one reason. Another reason is in my setup, I have my amplification is what's considered Class A topology. And so the Class A is the inputs and outputs are constantly on, constantly driving current. So it's not the most efficient amplification, and so it draws a ton of power, and so you got to make sure you feed it clean power. And but the result of it is you Class A amplification is really known for just being very organic, being very musical, and there's just absolutely no latency switching like a typical like a AB amp, because you're switching between the inputs and outputs, but they're more efficient as well. So that was another reason I did that. All of them are running 10 gauge wire. So again, the more current, the better. Think of it like, your internet, your bandwidth, the more bandwidth, the better. Same type of thing. And a lot of folks' electricity can be very noisy, right? And so you want, again, with a system like this in a room that's got sound control, it's a very quiet room, you hear everything. And so it's more important just to make sure that you've got your noise floor is as best.
Well, that's what I even noticed while we're filming in here. We got 4 of us in here. We got cameras. We got stereos. Everything's on, but you don't hear a sound out of it.
Yeah. And that's what you want to strive for. Because just when you're into music, and obviously millions of people are into music, and so music just moves you. I mean, as humans, and so to get that ultimate sound, it's truly euphoric. I mean, it's drugless. For me anyway, the feeling I get, and so why not make the most of it?
Right.
And so that's a lot of what's been done, and so again, everything in your kind of the chain of your audio becomes really important, and electricity is absolutely a key area. So.
Okay, cheap bastard question. Does having this sort of power, do you have a double your power bill? Does it have a big?
No, not at all, because all you're doing is you're just isolating the electricity, the voltage from your lights and everything else in the house. So you're just, as long as your panel has the extra slots to be able to support that, you're just adding another area. So again, the Class A amplification is going to draw more power. So when that's on, it's equivalent to like basically leaving the lights on in 3 bedrooms all the time. So it definitely draws a lot more. So from that perspective, it's not as efficient. It could cost more, but adding the extra lines isn't adding extra to your bill at all.
And then the one thing that I really noticed when I first walked in is all these sound panels. I don't typically see that in someone's home. I mean, you have sound panels on the ceiling, on the wall, and then you were mentioning these. I've never seen these wood sound panels. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so when I started really getting into, as I mentioned earlier, on you guys talked about the science of audio. Sound was just so fascinating to me, and so again, to me, it was just the more I learned, the more fascinated I was with sound, and so in my studies, I was just starting to realize this room is absolutely not ideal for an ultimate audiophile room. And so I even contacted a pretty well-known industry engineer, sound engineer, who does rooms for a living. He asked for the specs of this room in particular. I sent him my specs, and he said, "Don't even waste your time. So you'll never get good sound out of that room." And the way I am is I took that, you know what? I'll prove you wrong. And so I'd like to say that I have, and so, but again, back to the panels, that's why those are a big deal, and so what I've done is like these wood ones. These are like what's called a combination diffuser and a sound control for like, I don't know, probably around 200 to 300 hertz, because you want to get rid of the extra reflections in the room, because it's going to throw off your stereo image, but you don't want to deaden a room. So there's a lot of difference between sound control and soundproofing, and so this diffuses. This is like this what looks like kind of a big barcode. It's really just a mathematical equation that takes when music reflects against it, instead of a hard surface giving a direct line of sight into your ears, along with the speakers hitting your ears, it's really going to mess up your imaging. The diffuser spreads that out, and so then you're almost mimicking a much larger room, a much deeper sound stage than what is really here, and so it's pretty effective. And typically you'd want these more in the front or in the back of a room, on the sides where your listening spot is, and so that's why you see those positioned where they're at. The other ones are just truly sound control, again, to just control the reflections from the back of the room. The black ones, which are thicker, these are bass traps. So I gave kind of the scenario earlier about car audio where the bass builds energy and you hear that. Well, again, that's not how they record it. That's not what they wanted you to hear. So this traps that energy, right, from building up, so you don't have that artificial bass, that bloom that's happening. And so that's what those are in the corners, because typically the energy for bass can build up in those corners. So that's why I have those there. And the same thing on the ceiling. You can get reflections right off the ceiling into your listening area, and it's going to throw off your stereo image. And so again, controlling that sound will prevent that. So, but again, you want to make sure you have a live sound. Lucky enough, in this home, I have wooden floors, which is really pretty preferred. And so you want kind of a nice mix of hard surfaces and soft surfaces, and every room is different. And so you just have to get to know your room, and you got to spend a lot of time in it. And I did that here. Spent probably months really trying to understand this room and how sound reacts to it. And this is really the ultimate of what that research is provided.
So go ahead and take us then here. We're going to go look at your receiver, your amp, your preamp, and just a little explain. It looks different than probably most of us have. Like I say, Sean's come over to give me advice. I'm like, wait a minute, what's he giving me advice on? It's like I should just throw my setup away. Yeah. But and he's so kind to come over to my house and do this and this. And then I come over here and it's like, oh boy.
So this is the heart of the room, would you say?
I would say it's the hardware of the system for sure, and so it looks like a lot of stuff there, and which it could appear that way, but they all have a very specific purpose. So for me, I enjoy all different kinds of media, whether it's vinyl, CD, or digital. And so what you're seeing here is that being able to do all those different kinds of media. And so you've got this is just a CD transport, and you'll notice what's different about this transport is a couple things. One is most CD players have like a digital analog converter built inside them. Okay, this is just the transport. There's no conversion being done here at all. There's no filtration. There's no upsampling, and it is a top-loading CD player with a clamp. And the best CD transports in the world have top-loading CD transports with a clamp, and it has a vintage laser assembly in here, which is really cool, because here you've got this completely high-tech built topology with a very vintage and it's one of a kind, this laser mechanism for the CD player. And the architecture on this is really built around, you have a oscillator, which is like it's like an oven, like resistors that are really, they were designed for like submarines, like cold environments, the Antarctic, and so it's really protecting that. And the beauty of that is not so much a lot of people talk about clocking and how clocking makes a big difference. It's really about like the hash noise. It's all about, with CD players, you're removing that hash noise, and so that's what that's doing, which is why this is really so special, and how the CD sound from this is just unbelievable. And I'll even argue to say that it's better than vinyl, for me anyway. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but it's more accurate. And then this connects to a digital audio controller converter, which is right down here, which kind of looks similar to it. And this is connected through an I2S cable, which is really kind of a different format, connecting two audio equipments together, versus like an RCA or even a balanced. So that's connected to this, which is this is using what's called an R2R topology, which is like an array of resistors in kind of like a ladder configuration. And the beauty of that topology is it's typically more musical. It's more analog, more organic sounding, which sounds weird for a digital analog converter, but that's really how this topology is. And in digital analog converters, there's all different architecture. Not going to say anyone's better than another. They all have kind of their pros and cons. This is what I've chosen because to me this sounds the most organic and musical for what I do, and matching my system. But yeah, so that's the CD and the digital analog converter. I mentioned earlier my Class A amplification. Not too many manufacturers are doing Class A. These folks out of the UK have been doing it. They were the first ones around 30, 40 years ago. And it's just, again, a beautiful sounding amplification. Again, this is strictly just amplification. This is the preamp that is connected to this. And then all the components connect to the preamp, right? Just like your integrated amplifier, similar to that. And then down here is my how my digital is being streamed. So if you were to think of, if I was going to build a super uber computer that's strictly for audio, but without all the noise of a PC, without all the moving parts of a PC, That's what this is. It's specifically made for digital. And then again, as much as you can separate your power source from the internals, the better. And so this is just an external power supply for this. And then you have isolation, as you can see. So again, decoupling as much as you can, making sure that things aren't going to have resonating, kind of what you see with the big cables going to the speakers, getting those off the floor. All of that starts to come into play when you have a higher end system, because you'll again, you want as low of a noise floor as possible. So that explains that a bit. I don't know if you want to look at that.
So yeah, I do see this is Jay's audio, and is that kind of the industry standard, or how hard is those to find?
I mean, they're not terribly hard to find. They're just pretty unique in the sense that it's more of a boutique audio, I would say, built out of Singapore, and they have obviously USA distribution, but you have to know what you're looking for. These aren't going to come immediately up on a search when you look at CD players. You really have to know what you're looking for. But yeah, so these are an order out of the country in Singapore. So however long those are going to take. Again, they're not mass manufactured, so it just depends on where they're at with their orders. But a lot of the stuff is handmade.
So one of the biggest surprises for me coming into this room, other than holy shit, this is amazing, is that you put so much effort into the CD. You hear someone like Neil Young who's like, oh, they fucked up the algorithm with CDs. It'll never sound as good as vinyl. Yeah. But you, I think, would have something to say to Neil Young, because you obviously, and you said it yourself, that you think you have your CDs sounding better than vinyl. So that's amazing, just sort of unheard of.
It's a great observation. And again, a lot of this too is my opinion, but when you think about it, the CD, in its kind of just natural form, it's a 16-bit 44 kilohertz file, and it's a FLAC file, which is the most just natural digital file that you can get, right? There's no codecs attached to it, and so it's very pure. And so again, if you have a recording, and the recording is great, and the master engineering is great, and you have that on a 16-bit 44 CD, I mean, and you've got the system that can render it. Yeah, I don't think there's any match, because again, back to vinyl, it's very mechanical, right? And so there's a lot of issues you're introducing with that, and you have to really spend an enormous amount of money to get it to, I think, a level at which this would play at. And again, that's my opinion. But the other thing is the power source in this is completely isolated, right? So you're removing any sort of noise, any sort of hash noise from this. And with a vinyl, and I love vinyl. I mean, I didn't think I'd go to CD, but kind of the more I kind of was interested in it, I started to learn a lot more about it. And so when I play CDs now, it just shocks folks. I had someone in here yesterday that heard the CD, and they were just all vinyl. And he asked me a couple times, "This is the CD?" I mean, I had no idea it could sound like that.
Well, you had me at the Nancy Sinatra, Lee Hazelwood one, where I was like, wait, there's nothing on this turntable. Where's that coming from? And again, it just sounded so good. Yeah.
And is there anything that they do with CDs where you talk about all the different pressings of albums? Yeah. Is there that in the CD world at all?
There is. Yep, absolutely. So there's, and I've learned this just as of late, there's so many different pressings of a CD as well. And the same thing, like it'll be, this one's pressed and manufactured in the UK or in Australia or somewhere else. And, when you look at that, a lot of the, people prefer a lot of the vinyls from some of the other countries that are just known to be just absolutely, passionate and excessive about the quality, right? And that's a lot of it because, like I said, with this whole audio game, it's only as good as the whole chain that's connected to it. And the same thing with CDs. And so, if you've got people that are just ripping horrible digital files and then burn those onto a CD and then they reissue those out to the public, it's going to sound like crap. It's the same thing that they'll do to vinyl. They'll take a digital file and it's compressed and they don't do it right, and you're going to have a shitty sounding vinyl. And so a lot of it is really having to do with the original recording. How was it recorded? How was it mastered? And that causes a lot of different variances. And you can get the same mobile fidelity pressings as vinyl as you do on CD. And so there's absolutely, it's there's so many different versions on CDs, just like on vinyl. It's just, again, knowing what to look for. And
so we're back here on the couch.
And the last thing we want to talk about is the turntable. And you guys have probably seen some clips of it and wondered, God, I've seen that before. Where have I seen that? Why does a turntable like that look familiar?
Yeah, and when I came in here, it's like, look, Clockwork Orange. And I didn't really understand the reference. I'd only seen the movie once, like 25 years ago. So, Sean, what does that mean? Clockwork Orange turntable.
Yeah, so the table's pretty, not pretty, but it is very iconic.
Oh, it is pretty. It's beautiful.
Yeah, but it's what's cool is as you mentioned. So the table was in this, and I've got the album, Clockwork Orange. But the table was I think first designed in 1960, and it was showcased in this movie Clockwork Orange, and so it was part of the movie set, and they had it sitting on a cool table, and it was just so different than any other table. The design of it was very different. The philosophy, the engineering behind it was very different, and it just had this cool factor look. Well, out of that movie, it just became famous, right? It's like today what we know is it went viral. It just became super famous. And so it was used in different movies, in different shows, I think even commercials perhaps. And it's British. And so the original table that was in Clockwork Orange looks a little different than what you're seeing here today. But not much different. And so now you have this very small boutique company still that originated these back in 60s, are now manufacturing these. And luckily there is a local distributor that has an exclusive to distribute in the U.S. here. And so I've been through so many turntables. Just again, I'm always finding, again, they're mechanical, and I'm always finding, issues with each one, and so I've recently acquired this table, and I just immediately fell in love with it. I mean, I love the whole philosophy around it. It's all about decoupling again, and there's again with turntables a lot of different philosophies around it. And for me, anyway, I love this design. It is such an incredibly balanced turntable, meaning I can throw any genre at it, and it just is so forgiving. And so it's been a super fun table. It's fun to look at. I think it's becomes kind of a conversation piece.
Is it? It's always spinning day and night, 24/7?
No, it's not. I mean, it could, but I don't. If I'm actively listening for the weekend, I'll just leave it on because it's just easier to toss something on and do a quick listen. But and so they've paired up with a company that does the tone arm. So the tone arm is from a different manufacturer. From Onyx is the name of that arm, and so they've paired up with Onyx, and I think it's just an incredible pairing. Those tone arms by themselves are spectacular, and now matching it with this table, I mean, there's just such great synergies between the two. I love it. It's just been really, really fun. I've only had the table for a couple months. Like I said, I've gone through a lot of tables, really expensive tables, and this one was just, this is it. Love it.
So, like for Kaz and I, who don't put a lot of money into our turntables and sound systems, can you make an inexpensive sound system sound great with just speaker positioning and?
Yep, great question, and absolutely. I mean, a lot of folks can probably learn from my my journey, my mistakes. My personality. I get passionate about things, and music. I've been passionate about since I was a kid, and I just love music. I mean, just like all you. I mean, I'm so passionate about it, and so as I go into it, I'm all in. I commit, and so. I've been through so many different iterations going through this whole process, and at the end of the day, you can create such an incredible sound if you know what you're doing, if you know how to match components and not spend a ton of money at all. In fact, I've set up a couple friends of mine with very, very modest systems that sound so well. Again, you just knowing what to do, and I've learned a lot of the basics of setup, kind of a recipe in any room, because every room is different, and just setting those up for folks, and not having to spend a fortune and go through a lot of the stuff that I've gone through, and still get that same kind of euphoric just feeling of listening. It just, yeah, I mean, what more could you ask for?
Well, this is just, I mean, it's, for me, it's like overwhelmingly cool. Just it's thinking about music in a way that I never have.
Sure.
Yeah. It's just I wouldn't leave my house if I had this. And on the way in, we met your wife and daughter, and they just must be like so great to just let you do this. And sometimes I'm seeing it in my head like a serial killer, and he's got pictures, and there's red ropes going everywhere. That's how
all
I
stereo equipment.
Yeah, so that's what I just like. This is just on another level. It just, yeah.
Yeah. Now the family's been great. I mean, it's funny because they've seen me go through this kind of journey, and they've been so supportive of it, and the thing is, at the end of the day, they enjoy it as much as I do. They we'll sit a lot of times in the weekends. We'll sit in here and I play DJ, and we'll have a drink or whatever, and have someone over, and we love it. I mean, you talk about such a simple way to spend time and a healthy way to spend time, and especially with I mean, music. There's so much out there, and it's just like you feel like a kid in a candy store. So yeah, I mean, they've been really supportive, and kind of dedicating this room to that. You've probably noticed the TV that I've added in here.
Has it been turned on?
I've
watch it.
I've never had a TV in here in the whole time we've lived here, but that was something I felt like I could sacrifice. They've done so supportive of this that they really wanted a TV in here, have another place for either the kids or us to escape to and watch TV. And so I just installed that the last couple of days, actually.
Oh yeah, I wasn't here the last time.
No, and I of course, like myself, I do a lot of research, and just wanted to go in with something great, and got actually the sound coming through the speakers, which is phenomenal. I had no idea. It was like, wow, this puts watching shows in a whole new realm. I was like, I had no idea, because I'm so used to just music. And then to now pipe through some of the programs on the television, I was just like, holy crap, this is like, no one needs a home theater. You just do the 2-channel system with your. I mean, that was just, yeah, it was really cool. It is. So, but that was my sacrifice. So.
Well, we really appreciate you having us to do this on a Sunday on a day off. But what we're going to do is we will. Also, we'll post all the links of all the brands that Sean uses for his setup, and have pictures of everything from the speakers to the turntables, receivers, the decouplers, everything. So you guys can kind of research maybe their websites and see what they've got. And I think she's in a hurry, but Kelsie is going to have a spot on this couch and hear the experience that we've had before. Sean's going to play her a Led Zeppelin song. We're going to give her the sweet spot here on the couch. How's that sound?
Sounds like a winner to me.
All right. Well, that's about a
Yeah,
wrap.
thanks for the education. I appreciate it.
I'm Kaz. This is Sean.
And I'm Shay, and thanks for watching another episode of For the Record with Kaz and Shay. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.